Hi everybody. It's hot and sweaty under the mask, so I had to wipe down for a second. Yeah, so the gist is that I'm gonna have like probably about an hour-ish presentation, just talking about general principles like visual design techniques and stuff that you can use in augmented reality, some best practices, workflows, that sort of stuff. And then I'll also lead you through how to actually, like the nitty-gritty of how to use Adobe Aero to create like an image anchor experience of some sort. And basically, like, I brought an illustration that I'm going to turn into something while you guys are working, turning something, you know, into something beautiful in AR. And I'll be around so I can help you, you know, basically figure out whatever you want within the application. I'm here to help, so. Yeah, and there'll be lunch. I think lunch is provided. And then in the afternoon, we'll come back, probably have a little more workshop time, and then we'll print everything out, put it up on a wall, and everybody will get to experience one another's pieces and talk about them. So, cool. All right. With that, then, let's go. This is a series of videos that will kind of lead you through some of my thinking around this space. And this is an intro to me, but some of you may know me already. I'm an XR artist. I blend storytelling, illustration, animation, interaction, audio, and the physical world into immersive art experiences. Storytelling was my first love. I started out as a songwriter, but soon turned my attention to interactive art. It combined all the things I like to do, and it allowed me to co-author with an audience. Historically speaking, most art has been one way. The artist creates, and the audience observes, but I'm interested in blurring the line between art and audience. Transforming a one-way monologue into a conversation leads to unexpected discoveries, more meaningful experiences, and a deeper connection. And for me, art is all about connection. We're currently witnessing the birth of a new medium. We don't know what XR is capable of or how best to use it, but I'm all in. I want to explore that uncertainty and discover what's on the other side. Yeah, so that's a little bit of my work. Sort of how I got here, that's a good synopsis, but basically I was born into like an artsy-fartsy family that did all sorts of stuff. It was like interdisciplinary, like everybody was. So I never really felt like I had to pick, so I haven't, basically. But primarily, like what I excel at, I think, is like, or where I like get into flow state is like drawing, animation, songwriting, storytelling, that kind of thing. Like world building. But I got into computers at one point because I realized there was this new kind of storytelling that was possible where you could actually involve the audience in a more participatory way, sort of like deepening the connection, making it feel more personal, that sort of stuff. And I also just didn't want to be a waitress anymore, and so I like studied for a test and like miraculously got a job at Microsoft, and it started a long career in computers. Worked at Apple, and eventually went back to school, learned to code and all that good stuff. I've been working in games for the last few years, like Highlights for Kids, if you guys are familiar with that. And if you've ever been to a dentist's office, you may have experienced the magazine. I grew up in a dentist's office almost because my mom was like an office manager for one, and so I felt like once I was working for them, my life had really like come full circle. But anyway, I got to design games for them, which was like super fun to work in like the kids space, and do like world building in sort of an educational way. And then I moved to Portland. I started working for a design studio here, like a game design studio, doing much larger games and some world building and stuff like that. And then about 3 years ago, I basically decided to leave my job because I knew that I needed to pursue my art full time. So I saved up a bunch of money for like 2 years so that I had some financial freedom to do so. And I've kind of been exploring ever since. Simultaneously, I discovered that AR was something that I could do on my own. I actually didn't need like a team of developers like I had before. And so I just felt really empowered and just really excited about the type of storytelling that was like now possible. And it was so like new. Like I was actually surprised at like how few people were part of the scene at that point. I would like get on the internet and just be like, hello, anybody else in AR? And there was a few, but like not tons. And that was like really surprising to me. In the last couple of years, it's kind of like increased like gradually. There's been like kind of a wave like building. I think that the pandemic encouraged that because it was like a way for folks to access art without being, you know, physically present. Yeah, that's the long and short of kind of how I got here. So in this series, we're going to go over the unique capabilities and constraints of AR. There are certain things that AR can do that other mediums can't do. And there's also like certain things that like you can do in other mediums that you can't do in AR. So we're going to talk about a little bit of both. I'll lead you through like my AR workflow. Everybody probably works a little differently, but this is how I do it. This is also how I did like game design, so it's kind of an offshoot of that, but you'll get an idea of like how a larger project kind of manifests. We'll talk about like best practices for using both 2D and 3D. AR can be kind of picky. Like it's not very, many of the apps, they're trying to do a lot, so you have to be careful with like making things that are too processor intensive, like optimization is a big part of it. So anyway, we'll go over that. I'll talk about design techniques. So these are like specific things that you can do within AR to kind of lead a participant and to create experiences that are like easy to understand and also visually compelling, like how to create visual hierarchy. I'll give you an introduction to Adobe Aero, like the interface, how to build actions within it, different types of triggers, and then ultimately how to do the behavior builder, which is where you create actions and triggers. And last, we'll be talking about creating image anchors, which is where you have an image that is essentially like a launching pad for a digital experience. So the AR software will be tracking it in real time. Where the image moves, the experience will move with it. So there's a lot of really cool use cases for this. As an illustrator, I'm pretty excited about like the new storytelling possibilities of creating AR art prints and paintings. I've been doing a lot more like physical painting and murals lately, getting back to my painting roots. And last, we'll talk about how to share your work with other people, because that's kind of an important part of the art process. And that's it. Oops. Let's go back one. Okay, so as you probably know, augmented reality combines the physical world with the digital world. This is what sets it apart from other mediums. So what we're going to be talking about is leveraging that context, be it the context of the location, the context of a body, the context of an image. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but leveraging that context is where things get really interesting and uniquely AR. So back in the day, I'm not sure why the audio isn't playing, but I'll just tell you what this says. Back in the day when film came out, it basically copied theater. So all of the shots were like straight ahead and like they existed on a frame or like a theater with a frame around it, like a proscenium. And then later, as people began to experiment, they realized that there was actually specific things that film could do that theater couldn't. Things like jump cuts, where it like jumps from one scene to another, one framing to another, or close-ups, where you can like see somebody's hand as they're like walking through a field. Those things were unique to film. You could not do that in theater. So we're actually at a similar crux with AR. We don't really know what AR is capable of or how best to use it. And we're just kind of, we're at the period where we're like making these discoveries, like how can we utilize this medium in a unique and exciting way? Like what can AR do? So these are some of the unique capabilities and constraints of AR, and let's see. Okay, let's talk about leveraging context. So, as I was describing earlier, context is one of the things that sets AR apart. There's a lot of different ways to use context. In this experience, I'm leveraging the fall leaves that were already on the ground to create a piece that celebrated them. This piece uses an image anchor to attach the experience to the watch face. These are art prints. It's a way of essentially anchoring the digital experience to the physical world and creating a relationship between the digital world and the physical world. And that's one of the unique things that AR can do. It can leverage the body, which is, we all have bodies, which is pretty cool. Since we have bodies, our brains are built to understand the world in terms of our bodies. So as we move around the world, we inherently understand like how close or far things are, how fast they're coming at us, how fast we are moving in space. We have all of this like built into our brain, and because of that, you can actually leverage your brain's ability and sort of like sensory perception of those things within AR to create more powerful experiences. So using things like proximity and scale can be really important. If you create like an experience that's like super huge and right next to a person, that's going to feel very different from creating a tiny little thing that they can put in the palm of their hand. So thinking about making things in this particular way can be helpful. You can leverage location. Certain experiences can either be associated with like GPS coordinates or specific landmarks. There's a lot of opportunities with this. This was an Arbor Day piece that I created that sort of celebrated people's individual like favorite trees, but you could create walking tours like around town for tourists. You could create, AR overlays for historical buildings, providing context and more information, the stories of the place, at the place. Like that's going to make things feel, not only will people probably remember those stories more, but they're going to feel more alive because they're in that location.
This is an overview of my typical AR workflow.
Yeah.
I start by setting up goals. Then I move on to sketching and storyboarding. Once my plan is in place, I create a prototype and then test it in physical space to make sure my plan will work. Next, I design and create my actual assets. I lay them out in 3D space using Adobe Aero. Then I add interactions and animations. Finally, I test everything to make sure it's working, and then it's time to share with others. Whenever you start a project, it's important to establish goals, your goals as well as the audience's goals. This will bring clarity to your decision-making throughout the development process. After you have your goals established, the next step is to ideate. Honestly, this is one of my favorite parts of the process. It's the part where you get to let your imagination run wild without having to figure out the nitty-gritty practical how-to details. I'm an illustrator, so I always start with drawing. I typically create an inspiration illustration that encapsulates the vibe or aesthetic, and then some of the main characters or objects that will be within a scene. I then use this as a guiding document as I move into the rest of the development process. Once you've done that, it's time to storyboard. This is your experience blueprint. It's the phase of the project where you sketch out all of the key moments, the overall story arc, planning out how the participant will get from point A to point B, as well as any important interactions or animations that might occur in between. These don't need to be polished. The idea is to get it down quickly and effectively so you can iterate. Once you're happy with your storyboard, it's time to test your plan through prototyping. You could easily create prototypes with basic shapes, and luckily enough, Adobe Aero comes with a bunch of great built-in assets. I typically lay out my key elements and then attach their interactions. Then it's time to test that skeleton of an experience on a mobile device, in physical space with my own body. I found that you can't really intuit what these spatial experiences will feel like, so you really have to try them in space. Once you've tested your experience and you're happy with how the basic composition and the interactions are working, it's time to actually design and create your assets. This could be done in Fresco, Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, Substance 3D Modeler, Painter, or Dimension. Honestly, there are tons and tons of options. Here's a list of the current supported file types. Now that your assets have been created, it's time to import them and lay them out in a 3D scene using Aero. To import, simply drag and drop the files right onto your 3D workspace, or use the plus button in the upper left-hand corner. The next tool in your toolbar is your cursor, which you'll use to select things. Below that is the Move tool, which allows you to position your objects along specific axes using these arrows. Next is the Rotation tool, which is pretty self-explanatory. Then the Scale tool, which allows you to control size. Alternatively, you can control all of those things in the Properties panel in the lower right-hand corner. The next 3 tools in your toolbar allow you to navigate your 3D environment. Orbit allows you to pivot around the scene. Pan allows you to move up and down or side to side. And last, Dolly lets you zoom in and out. Personally, I always start my layouts on the desktop version of Aero because it allows for easy importing and a whole lot of precision. Then I test them in the real world from multiple angles using the mobile version. This workflow allows for efficiency, easy precision, and ensures that it's reading properly in the physical world. Now that you've created your layout and you've tested it to make sure that your composition looks like you want it to, it's time to add interactivity and animations. Both of these are created using the behavior builder in Aero. On the desktop version, it's in the lower left-hand corner. I'll go into more detail about how to use this powerful tool in later videos, so be sure to check the description below for those links. Now that you have the entire composition laid out with interactions and animations, it's time to test it, and test it well. As I mentioned, I typically check the compositions from all angles. If it's a nonlinear experience, I will change the order of interactions just to ensure that no matter how the participant uses the experience, it will make sense. I also test on multiple phones and tablets if I can, to ensure that it will run well, even on older models. Then I perform user testing. I ask my very kind and patient friends and family to test it for me while I watch. Other people's perspectives are often surprising and insightful. You've been looking at this project for a long time by this point, so a fresh pair of eyes is invaluable and illuminating. Now your hard work is paid off and it's time to share it with other people. In Aero, simply go up to the little share icon, then you can choose to either export, which will create a .real file that you can store in your hard drive, or you can select create a link, which will let you create both a URL and a QR code. And if you ever need to access that link, click on Manage Shared Links.
Yeah, so thanks for your attention on that. I know it's kind of a longer video, but it really does go into how I work. That's just an overview of the Aero interface, but I'm going to give you a much more thorough one here in a little while, but that'll give you an introduction. So,
let's go over some general best practices for creating AR. If you're creating an AR experience that allows people to move around, it's important to keep them safe. AR is a blend of the digital world and the real world, so don't cover huge portions of people's vision needlessly. It can be really disorienting, and it may block out important information about what is actually physically around a person, creating hazards. Don't make people walk backwards. It's not only awkward, it's a great way to stumble into something unexpectedly. Onboarding is incredibly important. Remember, many people have never used AR before, so you need to design with beginners in mind. If you're creating something with a large footprint, consider prompting your user to go outside or to a larger open area. This will help set expectations for the space required so people won't have to restart your experience in a more appropriate open place. Don't overload your user with all of the instructions at once. Try to introduce instructions when and where they are needed. Users will be more likely to understand and retain the information. One way of doing this is to create a proximity trigger that then reveals an instruction when the person gets close to that object. Try to keep your overall file size as low as you can. Personally, I shoot for less than 50 megabytes. If it gets too large, it can make the experience harder to share, especially for mobile phones that are often downloading over cellular, and you can start to experience performance challenges. Generally speaking, at the moment, AR experiences are best served in short doses. Users can become fatigued when using AR for extended periods, so try to keep it short and sweet. And last, don't try to recreate VR in AR, meaning don't completely overwrite the physical world. Leverage it. That's what AR does. It augments reality.
yeah, so those are some of the best practices that I've gleaned from the last 3 years of playing around. They're really not hard rules, they're more like suggestions. It really depends on the scenario, but this is what I'm thinking about when I'm making stuff, so it's all good to keep in mind.
Now let's talk about best practices when using 2D images and animations in AR. As I mentioned before, optimization is really key. Unless you need transparency or are using flat colored graphic images, I recommend using JPEGs. They can be compressed to much smaller sizes, and every byte counts when you're creating AR. Due to the way computers and graphics cards process data, it's often a good idea to use power of 2 images. A power of 2 image is one that has an aspect ratio of 1:1 or 2:1, where the sides are either a multiple of 2 or 8. These are some common power of 2 image dimensions. Although this is becoming less of an issue with modern technologies, it's still a good optimization technique at the moment. As a 2D animator, I've had to figure out the smartest ways to use 2D animations in AR because they can be quite large. This is because they need to be imported as PNG sequences, which means every single frame is an individual PNG file. They get very large very quickly, and to avoid this, I try to keep my file dimensions as small as possible, and I also try to keep my frame rate as low as possible while maintaining fidelity. Personally, I try to keep my animations between 12 to 20 frames per second. Here's a tip. If you use Photoshop files that contain layers in Aero, it will automatically create an illustration with depth. Simply drag and drop the PSD file right onto Aero's 3D workspace, then adjust the layer spacing in the Properties panel. There we have it. Easy peasy.
Yeah, that's a really, really fast way to create an illustration with depth. So if you don't have time and you need to sort of churn something out, this is a really good option. The power of 2 stuff, I can explain that further if you guys are interested, but basically it's either a square or a rectangle based on, 1:1 or 2:1 aspect ratio. I've found that even though the file sizes aren't necessarily smaller, basically the processing can be a little bit more efficient around it depending on the application, so I kind of use it as a go-to personally. And here's some 3D tips.
Let's talk about best practices when using 3D models, materials, and animations. 3D is a deep pool. You can swim for a long time in any direction, be it animation, modeling, materials, etc. And in my experience, each program interprets 3D data and formats a little bit differently. Aero currently supports models with up to 130,000 polygons, but remember that the simpler your model is, the better it will perform. So keep that in mind when you're modeling. These are some of the things that I do before exporting 3D models and animations to ensure that they're imported properly. I always apply scale, rotation, and position before creating any animations. This will ensure that your origin, where your model is anchored, is set to 0, 0, and all animations will have the appropriate starting and stopping points. Materials determine the color and texture of your 3D models. Sometimes they use images, also known as textures, to achieve this. If I'm using a material that has textures, I try to minimize my file sizes by using compressed JPEGs and power of 2 images. Check out the 2D best practices videos for more information on that. Some more advanced materials, also known as shaders, aren't currently supported by Aero, so keep things simple and test early to make sure that your materials are appearing as you would like them to. Armatures are essentially skeletons. They are a collection of bones that control animations for specific parts of 3D models, and in my experience, they are the most efficient way to use 3D animations in AR. If you create something with an armature, you can activate the entire animation with a single action. But if you don't use an armature, every single object with an animation will appear separately and will need its own individual action. So, armatures are a big time saver. Another step I always perform is baking my animations. Each program has a different procedure for doing this, but essentially what it does is it bakes every single frame rather than exporting just the keyframes. There are a lot of different 3D file formats, but personally, I typically export as GLB. They are smaller than FBX, and they work really well with Aero.
Yeah, so I'll go over more specifics about how to do those things if you guys are interested. There's of course a lot of different 3D applications out there. Blender's the one that I typically use, so I can show you how I go through that stuff with Blender if you guys are interested in that.
Directing the eye in 3D space has some unique challenges, but when we do it successfully, we reduce cognitive load, minimize disorientation, speed up visual processing, and increase comprehension. Luckily, there is a wealth of visual design knowledge that we can draw from. The key is to create clear visual hierarchies so your participant always knows where to look. One of the primary tools in your arsenal is contrast. It could be contrast in color, contrast in value, shape, scale, etc. But notice how your eye automatically goes to the specific locations within these compositions? That's not magic, that's contrast. Negative space is another way of creating visual contrast. When you surround something with nothing, you can't help but look at the something in the middle of it all. Movement is another powerful way to direct the eye in 3D space. I often attach an animation to a proximity trigger so that as the participant approaches the object, it begins to move and their eye is drawn to it. Most commonly, I use a combination of all of these techniques. Let's walk through a recent project of mine and I'll explain how I use these tools to direct the eye in 3D space. Warm colors tend to pull focus, so the orange gradient at the bottom uses both color and movement to draw your eye to the mountain, which is the perfect position to be in to see the next piece I want you to focus on, which is the quote sun. I then use the behavior builder to create a series of show actions with progressively longer delays to space out the appearance of all the new elements. To do this, I select the item I want to appear, then I open the behavior builder and I add a trigger. Next, I add a show action, I scroll down to the delay function, and then I assign it a time. I repeat this step with all of the elements that I want to appear using incrementally longer wait times so that things appear at a comfortable pace for the eye. As I mentioned before, warm colors pull the eye, so the main focal points of the piece all use a bright red. The central focal point, the head, uses a combination of contrasting bright colors to create a visually dynamic pattern. It's the only element with this high contrast pattern, so it really pulls the eye. But I've also added movement and placed it in the center of the experience, making sure to add some empty space around it. The secondary focal point is the red flowers. I've attached proximity triggers to them so that when a participant gets close to them, they start to spin, pulling your focus to their beautiful blossoms. Now you have a better sense of how I layer all of these techniques to create visual hierarchies. The resulting piece feels clear, vibrant, and alive. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into how I set up this project, I've included the source materials below.
As you can tell, I created these for a web series, which is why I'm saying stuff like, check the link below. I have no link below me, but I'll be happy to provide with files if you want them. I made this for Adobe, so that's where this lives right now on their website. But yeah, I mean, basically, this is just visual design principles. If you guys have ever studied graphic design or anything like that, you're going to hear this stuff talked about really extensively. There's a wealth of knowledge out there about this stuff because people have been designing things visually for a really long time. So if you ever want to buff up your skills, there's plenty of really good resources, lots of books, all that sort of stuff. So, all right, next up is best practices for designing for AR. So when you're designing for AR, you're creating experiences that have limited screen real estate, right? People are going to be viewing them through a mobile device for the most part, at least with Aero. So when you're designing, you really have to think about what fits within that frame. Specifically, like I try to think about framing, the initial frame. So the very first thing that the participant experiences, I like to sort of place it just a few feet in front of the participant if I'm creating like a spatial like walkthrough experience. So when they launch the experience, it's like basically right in front of them, and you know, as soon as they launch it, they know exactly where to go. They're not confused or disoriented. Yeah, and they can get to work and enjoy your experience. So that's typically how I do it if I'm doing like a walkthrough thing. We'll be doing, you know, image anchors, so I'm not sure if you guys want to do spatial experiences for them, but yeah, we'll see. All right, number two, place objects at a comfortable height. So when you're designing for folks, you know, you really have to think about your audience. Like, are you designing for folks in wheelchairs or maybe like a basketball team that's going to be standing up? is it a tabletop experience or maybe one that's going to exist like on the floor? All of those things need to be taken into account when you're creating these experiences, because you want people to be able to see them. In some of the more advanced software packages where you can use sort of like dynamic scripting to adjust to people's heights, that's kind of a better solution. But in Aero, it's kind of like a bare bones application. You can still do really complex stuff in it, but at this point there's not like custom coding, so you have to adjust height manually. Creating readable type is really challenging in AR because you don't actually have the ability to control contrast in the way that you do in like flat design. So if you look at this text in various like elements, you can tell like how challenging this can be because you don't have control over the background necessarily. So it's often better to use like bold font, stuff with outlines, glows, drop shadows, or even a background. I also use a lot of transparent elements so that you can see the physical world behind things. Because another big part of creating AR, as I talked about earlier, is not creating experiences that like block people's vision. This is about blending the world in kind of a seamless way. So yeah, any of those things are good possibilities. You just kind of have to do a lot of testing to figure out what's actually readable. Spatial text it's hard.
Immersive experiences, things can get complex quickly. You could have multiple animations, a voiceover, a soundtrack, and lots of visual elements, all competing for the user's attention. So designers must really learn to cut through the noise to create a clear experience by editing, timing things independently, and relaying only what is needed.
Only what's needed when it's needed. That's the contextual instructions that I was giving you earlier. Apologies, I think that my Dropbox has fed me an earlier version of this, so some of the things have audio and some don't, so just leading you through as needed.
There are also specific capabilities that you should take advantage of. Since we're designing for a human with a body, one needs to think in terms of the human body. Our brains are built to navigate a 3D world, so we inherently understand how large or small, near or far an object is from our bodies. This makes scale and proximity two really powerful tools
when designing for AR. Yeah, so that's the gist of sort of the best practices portion of this talk. Some of them may be applicable to the things that you're going to build, some might not be. We can go into more detail on these things. This is where you can find me online if you want to. The top is my portfolio, and then I'm some variation of either Dunaway Smith or Dunaway_Smith if somebody already had that handle on those places. And I have a bunch of tutorials on YouTube if you're interested in that sort of thing. So it's basically youtube.com/C, which I think stands for channel, / my name. All right, let's go ahead and dig into Aero. All right. Does everybody?
If you're using our computer, there is Adobe on there.
Mm-hmm.
You might need to create a free account to actually use it.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
The whole Adobe suite is installed on there.
Okay. So in the if you are using one of those, you probably have this little icon up in your taskbar. It looks like a little figure 8 kind of thing. If you click on that, that's the Creative Cloud icon. And now this is a beta app, so it can be a little hard to find, but if you go in the left-hand column there, it says beta apps, and there may be a selection here for it. Nope, okay. You might have to search for it actually in the toolbar. There we go. This seems to be, okay. So if you type in Adobe Aero and you click on it, this actually brings you to the mobile version. It says mobile under here, so it'll send it to your phone. But on the right-hand side, where it says other platforms, that's where you'll find the actual desktop version of Aero. So you can click on that, and it will, I think, begin to download for you. I already have mine downloaded and installed. Does that work for everybody? Everybody good?
I had to figure out how to log in.
Sure. If you want, you can just create an account that you're not going to use again, if you want.
That's kind of what they.
Yeah.
Create file update.
No. Software updates are the bane of my existence.
Especially when they don't give you like a deny option.
Yes, right. The automatic software update, that's the worst. Yeah, totally. So who, by show of hands, has used Aero at all? Anybody? Not so much? Not cracked it open? Okay. Have you used other Adobe products like Photoshop in the past, maybe? Yeah? Okay. Ish. Well, I think because Adobe's been around for so long, like a lot of the ways they do things have been transcribed to other applications, so this is probably still applicable, but the interface of Aero is like really pretty similar to a lot of Adobe products in that there's like a series of layers and there's like a properties panel, that sort of stuff. So we'll dig into that in just a second once everybody's like logged in. Just to start, I will go ahead and maybe open an old file while we're waiting. This may take a second to download. So this is the main interface for Aero. If you prefer, I can wait for a second if people are still logging in. What's everybody doing? Is everybody logged? Are you logged in?
It says it's updating creative.
Oh my God. Okay. All right. Okay. Right on. Well, in that case, I will chit chat about the interface a little bit while you all download stuff. So the basic gist is on the left-hand side here, we have a series of built-in assets. They have like abstract shapes. They've got like elements with animation already attached to them. So these are little characters and stuff that have built-in animations. They've got directable characters where you can tell it like go from point A to point B, but this only works with like built-in characters right now. I think they're working on it for like custom characters, but there's interior design elements. There's really cool like plants and stuff. There's like a very nice origami like forest pack that's pretty cool, low poly. So anyway, if you don't really want to create assets, you may be able to find what you need here. Personally, the only time I really use these is when I'm creating prototypes. I just want to create an experience with like the most simple shapes possible, and I don't want to spend any time building them. So I just use the built-ins while I'm like laying out a prototype. I'll test it in physical space, and then later I'll go through and actually design the actual elements. So that's what this is for. If you don't want to see it anymore, which I often don't, there's a little icon down here called Content. It's like a little file cabinet duder. Click that, and now you have more of your space. On the right-hand side, you've got your layers, right, like we were talking. So these don't really work like the exact same way that like layers do in 2D space, and that like the ones on top are in front of the other ones or anything. This is just like a way of organizing. You can create, if you want, you can create folders by like shift selecting multiple things, and then there's like a little folder button right here which will become active once you have things selected. Like if I wanted to do this for the clouds, for example, highlight, see how that darkens? So I'll name that clouds. You can just double click. And down here, you've got a trash can, which of course lets you delete things. You can also probably hit the delete key on your keyboard. This is adding a duplicate of a selection, which I do all the time because I don't like re-importing things a bunch of times. Also, if you can reuse the assets within your project, it will keep it smaller and more efficient, so that's always a good idea. Design with like redundancy, like if you can. There's also a line selection right here. Automatic rescale. I've literally never used that, so I don't even really know what it does. I think it's like a new thing. Revert to original size. This may not be handy for anyone, frankly. I have noticed a lot of variability in scale when it imports elements. I have no idea what it's actually using to like create a scale for things, so I don't know. Maybe this is like for future versions of the app or something, but and now there's like this replace selected asset, which is awesome. This is brand new. So I actually haven't even used it yet, but for a long time you couldn't replace assets with an arrow. As a beta application, you know, there's a lot of stuff that's like up and coming or kind of buggy. So anyway, this is excellent because now you don't have to recreate things if, like recreate behavior chains and stuff if you have to re-import an asset. So that could be really handy for folks. Down here is the properties panel. So this is where you can adjust like things pivot points, you know, like this is set to bottom right now, but we could change it to center. You see how this is like sort of shifting. So depending on when you're creating like rotations, for example, this is when you're going to want to adjust like the origin point and scale. So if something is being scaled up and down like this guy, it's now scaling from that point, right? Whereas if I had chosen center and then I tried scaling, do you see how like it stays at that center point but then shrinks around it? So anyway, that can be pretty handy. And also this is where you get like sort of granular precision, which, you know, is often pretty necessary. Down here, over on the left-hand side rather, is your toolbar. So I went over this a little bit in the videos, but just to show you, the first one's import, just a plus button. You can use that if you want. It'll bring up like a file tree, as you're probably used to. You can also drag and drop. I tend to drag and drop because it's like, feels like one less click somehow. The next one is the cursor. So this is just like your move tool, essentially. You'll notice that you've got the different axes are different colors, right? So that'll kind of help you like navigate within the 3D space. The next one is, the cursor is the selection tool, but it's kind of redundant. It's also like the move tool. So I can't tell a lot of difference between these two tools. Maybe there is something, but anyway, they move things back and forth and through space. There's the rotation tool, which I already described. It's pretty self-explanatory. Scale, same thing, makes things larger or smaller. And then the bottom three, or the last three I should say, are how you navigate the 3D space. So the first one is orbit, which allows you to orbit around items. At this point, I work better, I like keyboard shortcuts, you all might as well. That's a number 1. So if you hit 1, you can orbit really quickly. Number 2 is pan. So this moves you up and down and side to side. That's a number 2. And then number 3 is dolly. So this is your zoom. Zoom in, zoom out, etc. And yeah, that's how you navigate the 3D space. When you are happy with your layout and your setup and stuff, you do all of that in what's called edit mode up here in the upper left-hand corner. When you're done and you really want to try it on your desktop, you can hit preview, and that'll actually begin like playing the experience with the animations and the interactions and stuff that you've defined within the experience. So that is how you do that. Let's go back to edit real quick, and I'll show you the behavior builder. So this is where things get exciting. This is where things kind of come to life. So the behavior builder is where you're going to do things like you set up triggers and actions. A trigger is something that instantiates an event. So this could be like a tap trigger. It could be like a proximity trigger. So when a proximity enter trigger would be when I get within a certain distance of an object. And proximity exit. We'll just click on this real quick just to show you. Like, let me scroll down to the bottom. I'm going to hit down here trigger. There's a little plus sign. This is how you actually set up a trigger, and it gives you like a little list of what's available. So, okay, start is the first type of trigger. This is just a timer, and it starts as soon as the project starts. So, so if I were going to create a start trigger to play something, you select start, and then you'll see now you have a new button called action. So this is when you tell it what to do. We're going to go ahead and input action, let's say maybe like play animation, and then we'll go over here and choose an animation, like maybe the clouds, for example. And let's see, I'm not sure why it's grayed out, maybe because I don't have it selected. 1 second.
Is your cloud an image sequence?
Yes, exactly. So PNG sequences, I'll go over this again, but in summary, yeah, the 2D animations that I have are all PNG sequences that are zipped up into a zip file, and you drag the zip file. Once you have an action selected, then, like for example, let's go up to a start that is already set up. All right, so selected this one, you can tell over here, let me show you kind of these tools. So up top is where you can also modify the action. If you clicked here and selected the wrong one, you can modify it here as well. You can, this little play button will like play the animation for you, like as like a preview essentially. The subject, so it's gonna auto detect what elements within your scene have this capability. So since I selected play images plays 2D images, the PNG sequences. And it's gonna go through my experience and find everything that is a 2D animation and list it here so that I can select the different things. We'll go over like the different actions here in a second. Trim allows you to trim the keyframes. So if, let's say you have like a walking cycle or something like that, or if you put a walking cycle and sort of like an idle animation like together into the same character or the same thing, you can select, you know, a certain keyframe range and just play that if you want. If you want to adjust the frames per second, you can by selecting here and changing the image. Actually, I don't even know what this is. This is new. Never mind, I don't know what that does. I'll read about it in a second, I'll tell you. But I have used this is actually how you adjust the frames per second, is this little slider right here. So if you want something to go faster or slower, you can adjust it here rather than adjusting it within like After Effects or whatever. And then delay is what it sounds like. You're gonna be able to delay the beginning of the sequence by a certain number of seconds. You can just drag and forth, or you can type something in if you want. I have infinite selected right now, which I'll unclick for now, which is going to make this available. Play count is like how many times you want it to play. But if you select infinite, clearly there's no play count. It's just like forever. So if you want something to play like 3 times, you would just like tick it up, 1, 2, 3. You can also designate when you're doing like a play count that's above 1 to do like back and forth. So this is also like kind of a trick for using efficient 2D animations, because let's say that you're creating like a loop that's like the first 15 frames are really the same as the last 15 frames, just in reverse. Well, rather than creating a PNG sequence with all 30 frames, you can just use the first 15 and then select back and forth. And it's going to create a much smaller file, because you're using half of the files essentially. Yeah, so that's a pretty good trick. Go ahead and select that. And so that's a start trigger. There's another kind of trigger called a tap trigger. There's one here, which I'm sure you guys know what this means. It's a tap. It's like people's fingers on their phones tapping an object, if that makes sense. So if you're creating interactions, this is a great way to do it, because people have been using websites for a long time and everybody thinks they can tap on things. So it's a very easy to use thing. There's also the proximity enter, which I started to talk about, which is when you get within a certain distance of an object. There's also proximity exit, which allows you to trigger something when someone moves away from an object. Those are also new. It used to just be proximity, so that's cool. Now let's go ahead and talk about some of the different actions and their differences. So let's hit okay. So you might have noticed, first off, let's talk about the columns, because I found this a little confusing when I first started using it. this, it's so hard. Okay, here we go. My scroll wheel is set too fast. You'll notice that these are organized into columns, right? Okay, what happens is it'll play all of these, and then it'll move on to the next column, and it'll play all of those, and it'll move on to the next column. If you want to, do you notice how it's got like 3 little lines up here? That means you can drag and drop it where you want. So if you wanted to move it in between, you can click and hover. You see I have a little blue line now, or I could move it here if I want. So it's just like a way of making these animations or these actions like more modular. You can also drag it below, and I can attach to this column. I'm gonna undo that. But you get the gist. If you want to add like an element to this particular behavior column, you can just hit the plus sign, and it's going to give you a list of all of the actions. And if you want to delete something, you can just select it and delete it. And also, you've probably noticed this already, but when you select something, you get all of the granular information. So let's go ahead and go over each one of these guys a little bit. So play animation. This is designed for 3D elements. So this is different from play images. Play images refers to 2D animations. Okay, so that's the designation between those two. When you do this, let's actually change the item. Correct. Okay. Exactly. Yeah. So, for example, this sphere ring refers to up here. These little flowers have these little sphere rings that are attached to that play once when the animation actually begins. And so they have a baked animation within them. I might have been able to do this like within Aero, like as a spin or something like that, or a rotation, but I just chose to do it this way because of like, I think it's been a while since I built this, but I think it was an origin issue. So sometimes you have to play around with like the best way to do things. It would have been smaller if I had done it within Aero. So perhaps that would have been better, but I didn't. Anyway, over here is where you select the subject. Then the animation set, this is going to be your baked animation. So if you have multiple bakes, they'll appear here. And we can walk through that sequence of how to do that as well. If there's individual clips, you can select that there and adjust their clip length. Each 3D application kind of handles this a little bit differently, and it will be interpreted a little bit differently. So you might have to fiddle a little with your exports. I'll show you what works for me. Transit or speed is pretty self-explanatory. Transition means that if you're going from playing one animation to the next, it will more easily transition from that baked animation to the next. Treadmill is like standing in place, essentially. I think that's how it's explained. How does it go? Animation will override the built-in motion, yeah, and will play in place. So, like, if I had a walking animation that walked forward in space, rather than actually doing that, it will just, like, walk like that. Return to start position. This will return to start position after the animation is done, is what that means. And then you've got the same play count, delay, infinite, all that stuff that we talked about briefly. Over there. Okay. So let's go ahead and delete that guy and then go to the next one. So play images. As I was saying, this is 2D animations. So these are PNG sequences. They have to be zipped into, compressed into a zip file before you can import them. Typically, I use After Effects to do this, but you could use Photoshop. You could use any range of other applications. And I try to keep my file dimensions and my frame rates as low as possible, as I mentioned in the videos earlier, but I try to play around with it and see like how small I can get things. At this point, I'm like having to keep my frame rates down to like almost like 12 frames per second if it's any kind of like the longer the animation is, the more PNGs it is. So like the bigger the file is, like you can see how these things like bulk out like really quickly. So anyway, let's see if we can select the head, for example. So the head is a PNG sequence. that I created in After Effects. And again, we already kind of went through this, but you can trim if you only want to play a portion of the animation. You can adjust the speed, make it infinite, etc.
Could you use an MP4 as an asset?
No, not at this time.
You can export video in Premiere to like a PNG sequence though, right?
Sure.
So you can
Yeah.
do the workaround that way.
Totally. Yeah. You could use any other sort of encoding software to convert that MP4 to a PNG sequence and then bring that in. Yeah, for sure. It might be a little choppy if it's like real video of people and stuff, but you could play around with it. So play audio, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but I don't think I have any audio in here. Oh no, I do. Okay, I think I do. No, I don't. This doesn't actually have an audio clip associated with it. But if I did, it would appear here, and you could select it under audio clip. The difference here when ambient sound is checked or unchecked, ambient sound, basically the volume is the same throughout the experience. You would use this for like a soundtrack, for example. So it's not going to change volume at all when people move through the space. Versus when it's unchecked, it's actually a spatial sound, and it's associated with one of the objects that's in your scene. So if I attach a sound to this flower, for example, then the sound would be louder when I was closer to the flower. It's creating spatial audio, is what that's doing. And you can adjust, the volume and stuff as you would want to, since it's audio. The next one is spin. I think this is the same thing as rotate, so I'm not really sure why there's two, but whatever. Spin allows you to spin things around. It's fairly self-explanatory, but you can go ahead and select something. You can choose the axis, so X, Y, or Z. And you can reverse the direction if you want. You can change the duration, and then down here is where you get into easing. Do you guys know easing? That's like the animation curves, essentially. Like if things sort of like start out a little slow and then speed up, it's like it emulates like natural movement. So it's a great way of creating like some finesse in your animations. Then the rest of them are the same. The play count, the delay, etc. The next guy is bounce. Again, I think this is probably self-explanatory, but we'll show you just in case. It's giving you a little preview if you can see that. So I've attached it to that cup flower, and now it's like, it's got a linear bounce on it, and it's really long. So if I wanted that to actually feel like a bounce, I'd have to like pull down that duration like real quick. And oh, okay, the rebound. There we go. All right. So normally in easing, in applications, bounce is one of the easing options because it's actually like an animation curve that goes like, but in this application, they've included that functionality within rebounds, which is kind of surprising. You can tell I've never used the bounce function, but like it's, basically a rebound is the bounce. So if you want something to actually bounce, you have to create a bounce and then designate a rebound above one, bring down the duration, and then tweak your easing. See if that looks a little bit better. A little. I'd have to play around with this to actually make it look like a bounce. Yeah, that's not bad. A little bit longer. Okay, let's go to the next one. Aim. So this one's a little funny. Like, it doesn't act necessarily like you think it will sometimes, but we'll talk about it nonetheless. So you select a subject, so you create something that's going to aim at something else. Then you choose the target that it's aiming at. So it can either aim at an object within your spatial scene, or it can aim at the camera. right here. It's one of the top two. So I use this one a lot. Or it can also attach to the anchor, which is like the center point of the experience, if you want it to. So I often use the camera one for, I do a lot of like orbiting things. So for example, I created like a butterfly cyclone at one point that like, as you move towards the butterflies, they like come alive and then they start like flying around you like indefinitely. So I attached an aim to those so that they're looking at you as they like orbit around you. It's a way of like creating, it works really well for things with eyes. I'll put it that way. So if you want like things with eyes in your experience to follow the participant, which can be a little unsettling, so I guess, you know, use it when appropriate. But anyway, that's how you do it. I don't know what that is. I don't know what the billboard only is. I guess I could look that up.
Billboard is often similar to what you said, track the camera.
Yeah, okay. I wish they would put like a little info like icon next to it. That might be good. You can also, it looks like you might be able to create pins, and then so these are like individual experience, like individual aim targets within the experience that you can then move around. So if you don't have like, the way I would have done this previously is probably to have like an invisible element that I import, like an invisible like 1x1 ping or something like that, and attach it to that. But it looks like they've included that functionality, but now in like the pin. So you get that by hitting the like little plus button. Yeah, so that's aim. Let's talk about show. So show and hide are siblings. Show reveals something through a scale animation, and hide does the opposite. Let's attach it to something and you can see it move. Oh, they added fade. Very cool. This is all new. So you can see how fast that is. I'll change it to like 1, for example. So take.
Scale has to select the origin.
Say it again.
For the scale reveal, does it just choose the center as the origin?
Yeah, it's going to take whatever the origin is for that particular element. So if you want it to go from the bottom, you have to select the element, then change, like for example, change the origin in the properties panel. Yeah, exactly. So we'd have to change that like to bottom. Actually, I think it's this one. There we go. Okay, it's already set to bottom. So theoretically it should be doing it, but it's not. So this is a good example of like things that should work one way but don't necessarily. Being beta software, things don't always work exactly as you expect, so sometimes you have to play around. But let's try fade and like see what that does, because I'm real curious. Does that even work? Hold on.
It's real fast.
It's so fast.
It's so fast. I know, but I like, it's not. Yeah, I don't think that works. Why don't we go into preview and see if it works? Okay, it looks like partially transparent, like parts of it are kind of, so maybe it does work. Just like real slow, and it works differently for different elements. I would anticipate this probably works better for images, PNG sequences, flat things that aren't using like 3D materials, which can make things more complicated. So if you need a fade, you might need to do it in 2D. All right, and let's go ahead and go to the next one. Where was that start function I was at? Right here. Okay, so the next one is hide, which does the exact opposite. I think that's probably self-explanatory. It just hides things. I use a lot of like show and hides to kind of like manage like what people are seeing within an experience. Let's go ahead and delete that. Add the next one. Move. So this moves an object from one coordinate to another. You can adjust, you know, via the X, Y, or Z. Let's go ahead and show you the Y. So that moves it up. Okay, one thing that can be a little tricky, just as a heads up, it says centimeters, but like, it doesn't really mean centimeters. It means something, it's related to the scale of the object. So sometimes you have to fiddle around with, so for example, 6 centimeters on a very small object will be less impactful than, well, here, let's just show you. All right, so let's set this to 50 real quick. This object's not huge. It's supposed to be about 35 centimeters tall. Okay, so it moves about, since we've set it to, let's set it to 70, like twice 35, okay? You can tell that it doesn't quite move up like twice as tall as it's supposed to be, but almost. This is kind of the variability, you really have to fiddle with things sometimes if you're trying to get precision to get the right designation. But it's associated, I think it's associated with the size of the imported object. Versus if we did it with a bigger object, let's change it to, what is that called? A mountain? Woman. Hair, okay. Cool, I don't see it in the list. Let me try selecting it, and then we'll add a move over here. All right, so this thing is already 76 centimeters tall. Let's move it 76 centimeters and see how it responds. Okay, so that has moved about 1 of itself. Okay, this makes sense actually. So anyway, you get the idea. It's a little hard to kind of figure out exactly how much things are gonna move when you select the move tool, so you're probably gonna have to fiddle around a bit. Move 2, these are a little trickier. Those are only for the built-in files that we talked about earlier, the directable characters. These are the ones that will work with that. So basically you drag one of these into your scene, and then you designate a location for it to move to. I've had varying success with this, so yeah, just heads up. Okay, scale. I think this one is self-explanatory. It just makes things smaller or larger over time. You do this by a multiplier, so if I wanted this to increase twice its size, that's how you do that. Yeah, if you needed to, so for example, you'll notice here, I've put everything inside of its own folder. It has the whole composition, so if I need to scale the whole comp, I can easily. Yeah, yep, exactly. Yeah, the best way that I've found to really get an accurate representation of the placement of literally anything is just to try it with my own body. Maybe in the future they'll do something cool like a person overlay or something, just to kind of show you in the 3D workspace, but yeah, it's not there right now. I go up to share, and then I use export, and this actually creates a .real file that you can put on your any sort of file folder you have, and then I'll just put this on my desktop, for example. So, and then I use AirDrop personally. So I'll go down, I'll find the file, let's make this big enough so we can see AirDrop. That's this little icon. I hit AirDrop, and then it finds my phone, or it should, yeah. So I'm there. So I would select that, and then it automatically sends to the phone. It will automatically know that it's an Aero application, so it should open Aero. I have noticed that sometimes the first time you do that, it'll freeze up a little bit, so just cancel it and do it again. You'll gather there's a lot of, you gotta roll with the punches in this emergent space. A lot of things are really on their way to becoming their full version, so you guys are on the edge along with me. So that's how I do it. Also, that way you have I don't do it for every single iteration of the file, but I'll keep personally I iterate with a naming scheme that has the date at the very beginning, starting with the year, so that I can, or the month, depending on how deep I'm going on a particular thing. So it's easy for me to have a historical version of the file, and in case, God forbid something becomes corrupt or weird, you can go back and you haven't lost all that work. So if you do all of your work on the cloud and you made a mistake that you accidentally like left on and you close the application, okay, well that's just now, you can't Command Z out of that. There's no like sort of like historical list of what you've done within the application that you can like go back in time. So you have to like manage that yourself right now. Let's see, the rest of these I think are relatively self-explanatory, but let's go through them real quick. Rotate just rotates things, so this is basically what spin is. You can spin them on all of the different axes. So orbit is pretty cool. I think I described it earlier. It's like what you can use to orbit around like an object. So if I had a butterfly and I wanted it to like fly around my coffee cup or something like that, then I could select the butterfly as the subject, and then the center, I would choose my coffee cup. So this is the center of the orbit, and the butterfly will go like this. And you can choose, clockwise or counterclockwise or whatever. If you're doing, I often do orbits that are infinite, because I just want that thing to like infinitely like fly. I'll select infinite, and then I have to change the easing to linear, so that the orbit is continuous. If we had like an ease in, ease out on that, for example, it would like start slow, come to regular speed, then get slow again, start slow, come up to regular speed, and then get slow again. Does that make sense? Like easing? So anyway, if you want like a continuous orbit, linear is your friend. Sometimes though that slowdown is nice, because if it's an object that's orbiting the participant, like let's say this coffee cup is me and the butterfly is going like this, it'll like slow down sort of like in front of the participant's vision a little bit and then like keep going. So it's actually kind of a nice way sometimes to be like, hey, remember me? I'm the butterfly that's like orbiting you. The next one is follow, which the follow target is like, it's if you have like, I think it only works again with these like directable characters, like where you have two of them and one can follow the other. I haven't really played around with it much, to be totally honest, so like I'm not really an expert on it, but I believe that's what it does. Wait is just a way to wait. It's like, it does the same thing as a delay, but it's nice to kind of have it as like its own object, because sometimes I'll just want to do like, rather than setting up a delay for all of the elements within this particular column, I can just do one wait and drag it in between here, and now it will wait that designated time, which I change over here in duration, until it moves on to the next column. So that's kind of a handy modular way of timing things. And last is open URL. It opens an email link, or it opens like a web link. So yeah, that's it. Which is actually really nice because, okay, so Aero, in order for people to view Aero, they do have to have Aero installed on their application or on their phone or tablet or whatever. But which is nice, it's kind of standalone, but there's a lot of other AR software packages which you may be familiar with that are sort of based around social media. So like Spark AR is Instagram or Meta or Facebook, whatever you want to call them. That's their offering, and every single thing that you make has to be viewed within their ecosystem. And they do not allow, it's like a closed garden. They're like, no, don't leave. And so they don't allow you to put URLs in your experiences. Same thing with like Lens Studio. They also don't allow URLs. So if you want to create an experience that has a URL within it, like say you have like a business card that like leads to your portfolio or something like that, then Aero is actually a good solution. Although people have to download stuff right now, at least they can open the URL that you want to send them to. Hopefully, my hope is that things will move to WebXR, where people don't have to download another app to view it. It will just be viewed within your browser or your OS, for example. So it's just a native support versus having to like get people to like download an app before they experience something, because it seems like pretty horrible onboarding to me. But it's where we're at. It's early days. So Did all that make sense? Like the, yeah? Okay, cool. If
So for someone to see any of these, they have to download the app first?
That's right.
Even with the target? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I see what you're saying.
Yep.
We've been learning about eighth wall and some other options that kind of
WebXR,
work, move around that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We're not quite there yet. I see what you're saying.
I've used, so I last year, I went on a journey. I was like, I know this would be so much better if I could just send people to a browser and have them experience it. So I like systematically tried all of the web AR like applications that were out there, and I like made a spreadsheet like with functionality and price and, you know, like my tests and all that sort of stuff. And my summary was like, we're not there yet, like at least with what I was trying to do. Eighth Wall was definitely the best of the ones that I tried. So Zapworks was also good at the time. Things have probably changed. It's been a year. This is like a really fast-moving industry. But Eighth Wall was recently purchased by Niantic, the folks who did Pokemon Go. They changed their pricing scale, which is good. It's still kind of expensive though. It's like $50 to $100 to like enterprise. I think you have to contact them directly. But so for a lot of
It's really expensive, because it's $100 to just make stuff even if you're not selling
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and also it's like it's really built for people with game dev experience. Like you really do have to know custom coding. You have to know JavaScript to be able to work within it, or at least be able to like read documentation like that and then sort of stitch together different scripts into something. So hopefully we'll have, you know, something that's like web-based, that's like easy for everyone to use and is either free or close to it in the future. But we're not there right now.
When you go to open URL, it closes the app and then opens a browser window.
Sure does.
I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for example, if I created an image anchor that was associated with my business card, someone would need the app, so I'd give them a QR code. I put a QR code on my actual business card. Then they scan the QR code, it automatically launches Aero. It's looking for the image that's on my business card as the image anchor, which I'll go over in just a second, and it'll have the experience associated with the card. So as I move the card in space, the experience will also move. I actually did this, hold on, but I use Lens Studio a lot. I actually use all of these applications like a lot. I use Aero, like I started out in Aero because I was like I got like a art residency with them because they wanted to kind of discover what they could do with the software, and like gave me 3 months to like just do whatever. But I've since moved on to pretty much all of them. But yeah, I was sort of surprised to figure out that Lens Studio doesn't let you put a URL in it because they tend to be using it for like, they've been doing it longer than anybody, like really. And so they're like more innovative. They're the ones on the edge, as far as I can tell. They're the ones that actually have the AR glasses that I've been developing for and that sort of stuff. But again, these walled gardens, companies love them. So anyway,
Apple's AR Quick Look. Have you looked at that?
Reality Composer.
It's AR Quick Look.
Oh, Quick Look is the new name. No, I haven't tried Quick Look yet. I tried it when it was called Reality Composer. There's actually a few different iterations, and I also used Unity exporting to iOS essentially. So I've developed for Apple phones for a while, but the thing is like what's cool about the Apple stuff is that they know that only people with Apple phones or mobile devices are gonna like access these things. So they made the support for that stuff native. So you can actually just send people to a link to one of their files or whatever, and there's nothing new to open or download or anything like that. So it's a very seamless experience, but it's only for Apple, of course. I'm sure you guys know this, but Apple glasses are coming at some point.
Yes.
But the rumors abound. Nobody knows when they're happening.
There are specs now for it. They're finally out. I think we could expect announcement at the next World Developer Conference.
I'm gonna guess the next like 1 or 2 years. Yeah. We'll see. I don't know. I worked for them for like 6 years, like right out of high school, and they tend to, you know this, they keep everything real close to their chest. They like try to perfect things and then they release them. And what they seem to be doing in this space is waiting for a bunch of other people to kind of test things out, figure out what works, and then they're gleaning those lessons and integrating it to their own product. They're in no rush to get to the market.
But it's an interesting conversation because for AR to become ubiquitous,
Yeah.
we really need devices that aren't handheld.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think there's all sorts of interesting things that are out there right now. Actually, if y'all want some time, or I can send you the YouTube link to the talk I did last week, but I kind of went into like where the current hardware is for all this sort of stuff. But there's the first lenses have just been tested in human beings by a company called Moho. They look a little crazy because they're like bigger than a person's iris, so they like block out like some of the white in like a contact lensy kind of way. I don't know what it really looks like when you're wearing them because I haven't seen any footage of that. I think I've only seen like VFX, like comps of like what it could look like. So I don't really know how much augmenting it's doing, but it's offloading all the processing to a separate device, which is totally how you should do it for something like lenses, because doing all those calculations on something that's as small as like a contact lens, like literally right next to your eyeball, seems problematic, like dealing with heat and all sorts of things. You know, I'm a fan of my eyes. I want to keep them. So the lens, or a lot of people are doing AR pass-through with Oculus right now. I don't know if you guys have like Quests, the like VR headset. It's pretty cool. I haven't dealt with the Oculus ecosystem much. I believe you use Unity to develop for them, and doing pass-through through them is pretty cool because they're very capable hardware. They can handle a lot. Versus Snap Spectacles, which I thought about bringing today, probably should have, but they're actual AR glasses, so you look through the world and then AR is projected on top of things and you can use your hands to work within the experiences and stuff like that. But they're kind of just like regular glasses, like size-wise, and they're doing so much processing that they can overheat pretty easily. It's definitely one of the challenges. Like, I think I've eaten like 4 pair of them, not literally eaten, but like I've eaten through them because every single time you make something overheat, like you're basically damaging it, like, and so over time, like its ability to like retain power and its battery becomes decreased and all sorts of stuff. So there are some challenges. I mean, partly it's because I'm literally pushing these things like to their edge. The last project that I did for them, Snap hired me for, they basically wanted to prove what they could do with the glasses. And so I created a piece that was like doing 3D hand tracking within space. It was using voice ML. It had a real-time physics engine. Like, it was just doing all sorts of crazy things. There was like 6 or 7 like hardcore processing things that it was doing. And, it worked on the glasses. But, you couldn't hang out in there for half an hour. You could only do it for probably like 5 minutes. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at, like hardware-wise.
Have you gotten your hands on Magic Leap?
I haven't. No. I went to AWE this year and tried to stand in the line, but every time I did, it was like 2 hours long, and I didn't do it. Yeah.
It was just announced there, wasn't it?
Yeah, the
Big
2.
glasses,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks awesome. Roni, the guy who started Magic Leap, is like a very smart, cool guy. It's interesting to see, his sort of change in the space and that sort of stuff. But yeah, it'll be really interesting. I mean, the whole evolution of this stuff has been much slower than people anticipated. Adoption's not happening as quickly as everyone thought it would, like for VR and stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of unpredictability in this space, but a lot of people are pointing towards enterprise because they have the big bucks. So, and
I have a question, Heather, about the URL. So
Yeah, yeah.
use a tap.
Tap would be great.
Tap for that.
Yeah.
In terms of that logic, because we can just follow an action, right? It would be, I guess it could.
Yeah. So the way you would do that is you would just like, here, let me delete this. Come down here. Just start afresh. All right, so I'm gonna hit trigger, I'll go to tap, I hit action, I go to open URL. Over here, before I hit tap, I probably should have selected an object actually. Let me do this again. Oops, I think I deleted everything. Sure did.
Do you have an undo? And while you have, I thought you do it, it looks like you do.
And you can't undo, so we gotta.
You can undo when the application is still open, but it looks like it ate it. Come back. This is why I save redundant files. You get the. It doesn't happen all the time, but looks like there's like a display problem.
Because it doesn't even have a save on the as an option. So.
Well, the way you get around that is you export it. That's the save.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Every few seconds, it's like saving to the cloud server. So theoretically, it is like saving it, but the way that I actually save is I use share and then go to export. So
that's actually a project file, not just an export file.
Yeah, this is a copy that was made of this particular document. You know, I'm not actually losing anything because you'll see it says copy to on here. But yeah, it looks like there's a render problem right now where everything's invisible. So yeah, so let's just close it down and launch it again.
So when you do a bunch of work in there, you just re-export it each time and then just give them separate names.
Yep.
I see.
Yep, exactly.
It's good for us to see this, just so that we know what.
Yeah, this is how you actually work within it. Yeah, totally. I mean, real talk, like, because everything is so edge, you know, we're just like right on the edge of the technology, like you have to be like so patient. You really have to be able to start over again. You got to roll with the punches. Like what I typically do is I'll have an idea for something and theoretically it should work in the software because the software says it can do it, but like sometimes that doesn't work out. So I'll actually build a prototype of the functionality of what I'm imagining within the software and then test it to make sure it actually works. That way I don't spend time, you know, iterating on an idea or making assets for it, that sort of stuff, when it's not actually going to function within the software. So once I've proven that I can do the thing that I'm thinking I want to do, then I will go through and actually make the assets and make the project file and that sort of stuff. So it's a more efficient way of working, essentially. That way you can kind of discover like where the boundaries are, like what are the constraints, like, and design based off of that. Let's see. Actually, why don't we start a new project? I did an illustration yesterday that I was going to use for workshopping this with y'all today. Just going to build it while y'all are building stuff. I use Procreate a lot. Let me share this as a PSD with my laptop.
Does Aero crash on you ever? Do you get hard crashes in Aero?
I sure do. Another reason to save all the time. Yeah. It's not all the time. I mean, I have noticed like that the mobile version will sometimes like just need restarting. But yeah, it's gotten more stable over the last few years. I've been working hard with their engineering team to try to make it like more stable, but you know, this stuff's really complicated. It takes a while. All right, so this is a illustration. I'll go ahead and just drag it to my desktop. Okay, so I'm gonna open this. I exported this as a PSD file, so a Photoshop file from my iPad. I'm gonna use one of these images. It's actually a series of images, like an animation sequence, as my image anchor. And just to show you how this can work. So first off, I'm gonna export this, just the whole image. Actually, I'm gonna crop it first. Okay. I'm gonna export this image as, I'm just gonna do a JPEG file. I'm gonna make sure it's not ginormous. That's pretty big. It should be able to recognize it even at like lower resolutions, if there's a lot of detail and stuff. So I'll just make it like 50% of the original file size. Just make it a...
Would 2048 be a max pixel dimension? Or is that
For an, yeah, you could. I mean, for an image anchor, I'm not sure that's really necessary, like, because you're not going to be displaying that image within the interface. It's just looking for that pixel data. So 2048 would be really big. I would say 1024 is probably more in the range that you're going for. So I'm just going to call this like image anchor. Okay. This is a new laptop, so I'm still kind of saying yes to all the things. Let's go ahead and start a new file. So to do that, you hit new file. Hit OK. Close this guy. And then down here in its properties, this is where you actually select the anchor type. Okay. So if you do horizontal surface, that's any flat surface that it detects, like the floor or a table or something like that. Vertical surface is the wall. And image is image anchors, which is what we'll be doing today. So I'm going to select image. It's going to open up a file tree, and then I just have to direct it to the file that I just created. So that's the image anchor. And now you'll see it has like a little thumbnail of the image that it's going to be looking for. And you'll notice here, it sort of shows me the size of that object, right? So now if I wanted to create something on top of it, like just real quick, just to show you that it's working, I'm just going to drag a cone on there. Boop. I am a cone. Okay, so now if I exported this as a .real file and then had it look for this image in my physical environment, which, let me go ahead and send this to my phone too, and that way I can view it on both. Actually, I can just view it on my iPad, it'll be bigger. All right, so I'm gonna go up here, I'm gonna go to export, go ahead and export that .real file.
We have some iPads to test out.
Okay, that's perfect. And now I'm gonna share it with my phone. And now it's saying like open with Adobe Aero. It like knows it's an Adobe Aero. I have noticed that, so let's talk about image anchors, successful image anchors for a second. Sorry, I make sound effects with like everything, so hopefully that's not too distracting. Yeah, my Dropbox didn't like update everything for me. That is a bummer. Boo. Okay. Well, I think I have... Alright, I guess I'll just talk about it then. The image I was looking for is not there. But basically, there are a few different things that work well as image anchors and things that don't work well as image anchors. So when it's searching for an image anchor, it's using it to anchor itself within space. So directionality within the image can be important. For that reason, radial symmetry doesn't really work because it's the same thing in all directions, right? So it can't really tell what's up or down, like it gets very confused. So using something that has enough complexity Not too much repetition is really good. High contrast is really good. Yeah, like a certain amount of detail. The very, very simple shapes that I've experimented with often aren't enough for it to really anchor to, so sometimes you have to, you know, add a gradient or whatever. It takes a little bit of like testing, so I would say maybe the first step to try if you have your images is to set up a new Aero experience, create an image anchor, direct it to that image, try it out. And if you run into problems with it, I can help, and we can test stuff. So yeah, so that's the gist of working within image anchors. You can create all sorts of like interesting experiences. The ones that I've created myself tend to work better at a smaller scale. So I tried to, in the beginning, like when I was first doing stuff, I was trying to create these like spatial experiences that were oriented to an image anchor that like that hangs on a wall. So I did like a wedding thing for some folks. And what it's doing, since it's tracking this in space, every little movement is amplified by the scale of this object. So every single time that I moved in relation to the art print, it was creating jitter, essentially, because the objects were too big. Like, because all of the movement that it was experiencing on the image anchor was being translated through the scale, like multiplied essentially, to the objects that were attached to it that were like world-sized to like walk through. So the whole experience was just like shaking like this. So what I would recommend is like creating experiences that aren't too much bigger than the image anchor itself. Like, you can go out, you can go around a little bit, but maybe not like a walkthrough experience for an image anchor. There's just like I think there's some things to iron out with like how that works. I don't know what you guys were planning on building, but we have about 10 minutes before lunch, I think. Okay, I think it's workshop time. Yeah, we can talk about people's individual projects.